Great Wednesday. Welcome to the Fully Human Connections podcast. I'm your host, King. I'm joined by my co-host, Reggie. How you doing today, Reggie?
I'm doing real well, King. Always good to see you on Wednesday morning. Can't wait for our conversation.
Absolutely, absolutely. Same here. And so, with that being said, we'd like to get things started with our gratitude moment. Well, first, before I ask you that, uh, were you, what's your spiritual energy number from 0 being life sucks to 10 being life was awesome?
Yeah, so it's because I continue to learn from you. It's a 10 because it's not so much a measure of how I might be feeling in any given moment, but it's a measure of a choice of how I want to show up. So I'm operating at a 10.
Excellent, excellent.
Yeah.
Well, equal here. I'm operating as a 10 as well. I tell folks that, it's a choice, and I see no logical choice to choose anything less than that. And then when you choose a 10, you begin to hold yourself accountable to begin to want to operate at that level and do things mindful, conscious, whether it's meditation, whether it's activities, whatever it is that gets you to a 10. So it becomes your true north is how I look at it as well.
Yeah.
So definitely thank you for sharing. And that leads us right into our gratitude moment. You want to share what you're grateful for this morning, Reggie?
Sure. So I'm always grateful to have indoor plumbing and to have electricity that runs a refrigerator with mostly fresh food in it that I have access to. And occasionally this time of year, I'm also grateful that the electricity allows me to have air conditioning. But more specifically, last night I went to a place about 45 minutes away that I had been to once before just to see a concert. And it was a cafe last night. I didn't know anybody there, and it was mostly musicians playing music and a couple of poets. And I showed up, and I basically gave a 10-minute introduction to the book. And I'm just really grateful, first of all, to artists, to poets and musicians, because they make the world a better place. Most of them do, not all of them, but most of them do. It was just, and it's a friendly group of people, and they were receptive to my talking about the book as opposed to reading from it or reading poetry, which I've done for years. So I'm really grateful for the folks at the Merriall Center in New Milford, Connecticut, and how they welcomed each other and me last night. It's a reminder, as we look at all the fractured and fragmented things in our world, that there are lots of really good people, lots of places doing good things. So I'm grateful for that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you for sharing. Glad you had a great experience with that. I'm grateful for my standard, I call it my small things list, which is life, health, ability to see, hear, walk, talk, stand, breathe, and have a sound mind. I'm also grateful for a roof over my head, another 24 hours to pursue my purpose in life, a mother who's alive and who has sound mind and still has the ability to have love, energy in her, and still the chance to experience that with her, as well as, again, the challenges that I'm faced with that I believe forced me to become wiser, forced me to grow, and forced me to put myself in a perspective of, I should say, put me to start seeing things from different perspectives that I may not normally have seen had I not had certain experiences. Like I give you an example, just this morning, about maybe 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, brother's been staying with me, and someone stole his car from in front of my house this morning.
Oh.
So he leaves out at 4:30 to go to work. So I didn't go to bed till 1 o'clock. So between 1 and 4, somebody stole the car. And he has one of those Hyundais. And what's interesting about the story quickly is that the Hyundai he has, the Hyundais and Kias, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but they've been stealing those across the country at an alarming rate, extremely alarming rate. So much so that the police had came out last month and put little cards on the windows of folks who have those cars, my brother being one of them, and said that, you come in the police station, get a free steering wheel lock if you come to the station. So I went to the station for him and picked the steering wheel lock up and everything. And my brother was just telling me that just yesterday, ironically enough, he said that they give you a set of 2 keys, and they give you these keys in this little very thin ring, and he lost the ring with both keys on the steering wheel lock, and he wasn't able he had at work, he wasn't able to, get the server log off, but he didn't put it on, unfortunately enough. And the supervisor was able to come in and kind of muscle it off just the day before. And then last night, someone steals his car. So had he had a steering wheel lock on, they wouldn't be able to steal it, or maybe they could think so. So my lesson, because I almost looking, what's the lesson in that? So one of the lessons is I've gotten those little keys that you get from different locks, and they're always on those little thin rings. It's very thin and easy, and they come in sets of twos mostly. If you don't separate those immediately, like you will lose them. Yeah, because those rings, when you put them in your keys, you're in and out of your pocket, those rings can easily get stretched, and then you end up losing the keys that way. So that's what my brother had to deal with, and because he had got to the point where he was like, I'm not getting that lock. I'm just, I'm happy it was off. It was cheap. It was cumbersome putting that lock on. So he's complaining about the lock, and then the very night that he didn't have the lock on his car, someone came and stole it. So you gotta look at the lessons. You gotta look at everything that happens in your life, whether it's, you might view it as negative. I've learned that on my personal journey, my personal growth, moving on the path to become more spiritual, that I no longer define things as negative or positive. I just define circumstances as just circumstances, because they can be positive and negative depending on how you come from that, what lessons you learn, and how you respond to them, and what you allow yourself to come as a result of that. So I'm thankful for those kind of lessons. It's my long story short on that.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about that. I was nodding because first of all, I own a Hyundai, and I've had not the Hyundai, but I had my 4 times in my life. And when I was living in New York, I had my car vandalized, and once it was stolen, and it was stolen in Manhattan. So it was either in a chop shop in New Jersey or on a boat to South America within hours. It's like, the first precinct in Manhattan said to me, yeah, we're going to look for it, but the odds are that thing is already getting chopped apart or it's on a boat. But it was the same thing that the Hyundais have now. It was a Toyota Corolla SR5 that kind of had the hideaway headlights, the closest thing to a Corvette I would ever own.
I remember those.
Yeah, and those were they were a gold mine in South America. And in the Caribbean, people wanted those cars. So they were prime to be stolen in the U.S. because they just, the bad guys would steal them and then put them on a boat and sell them down below the equator. So
was it stolen in daytime?
It was still light. It was early evening. I was having dinner with a friend, and
at a restaurant.
No, it was actually in an apartment, and it was like a high rise. It was down just like 2 or 3 blocks north of the World Trade Center, which was still in existence at the time, the 2 towers. I went to the bathroom, and she came out. She looked like the world had ended. I said, what happened? I was in the bathroom for 90 seconds. What could have happened? And she said, do you remember where you parked your car? I said, yeah, you can see it from the window. She says, I think it's gone. And I looked out, and sure enough, it was gone. So it was stolen like 5 or 6 p.m. on a summer evening in downtown Manhattan.
Wow.
And there was a little bit of glass left from the driver's side window because they just punched a hole in the window and got in that way. It wasn't like they were trying to preserve anything. So there's like the remnants of some glass particles was where my car was. I wasn't laughing then.
Yeah. Similar here. My brother woke up and all he found was he had tint on his windows. So the driver's side window was smashed out, and the whole window was like, with the tint on the ground. And officers said they perfected how to smash out the window and not make a lot of noise. Because normally I can really hear it because it's right below my bedroom window. And one of my complaints is I hear all the street traffic. But there's a TikTok video I haven't seen it, that shows you how to steal those cars. And since that video has come out, I did a little research this morning. They said thefts have gone from like 67, 74 year prior to the TikTok video up to 774 now. So the TikTok video has been out, and it's mainly young kids stealing them. And they're able to steal it so quick. Even if I had looked out my window, the officer said, and saw them stealing my car, by the time I, got dressed, ran downstairs, they still have been able to get the car and left. That's how quickly and easy it is to steal those cars and how they perfected that.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how, if you put your mind to something that seems complicated to me, like it would seem very complicated for me. If you were to sit here and say, I'm going to give you $1,000 to go out here and steal this car in less than 10 minutes, I would have no idea how to steal a car in 10 minutes. I know what I've seen on the news, on the movies and stuff like that, but I would have no idea. And for those kids to be able to perfect that in less than 2 minutes and put their energies towards that, I just think that's a waste of energy, first of all. It just shows how, our topic, which I'm allow you to go into, I want to bring this back up once you announce a topic, but that just shows me that if you allow that perspective to define you, where it can lead you to. So with that being said, that's an segue into what's our topic for the day, Reggie?
Yeah, so as we've been doing for over a year now, speaking about my book, Healing America's Narratives, the Feminine, the Masculine, and Our Collective National Shadow, Becoming More Fully Human. So what we've been doing the last 4 or 5 weeks is taking a deeper dive into the specific elements of the collective shadow of the United States. I'll just say them quickly, and then we're doing the 4th one today. So the 9 elements of shadow that we speak about are ignorance, arrogance, fear, bigotry, violence, greed, excess, bullying, and untrustworthiness. So what we've done in the previous 3 weeks are ignorance was the first one. We did arrogance. Last week we did fear. And today we're going to take a close look at bigotry. And just to be clear, because some people use the word bigotry and are not clear on exactly what it means. They think it's the same as racism. And racism is a type of bigotry, as is sexism and homophobia and everything else. But bigotry is basically the perspective that other views are wrong, false, and should be ridiculed, harassed, and basically deleted. So in other words, I have the right view. I have the way I see things. My beliefs are the right ones, and everything else is wrong. And then you treat those who hold other views as though they're bad people or they're wrong. So that kind of thinking, bigoted behavior, it seems stems from, and we have these first 4 definitely going in sequence. If I'm ignorant, which we spoke about 3 weeks ago, or 2 weeks ago, I don't know any better. So ignorance, again, like it can be used, you and I have spoken about this, it can be used as an insult, as a synonym for being stupid, but all it means is not knowing something, which if you're healthy, that's the perfect place to learn from. Oh, I don't know, so I'm going to find out. So that's ignorance. I don't know. But if I'm unhealthy, my ignorance can lead to arrogance. So I'm ignorant. I don't know any better. I find myself in a situation where other people seem to know more than I. So rather than learning, I raise my voice and make myself big, and I treat them in an arrogant way. The combination of ignorance and arrogance can lead to fear that I'm inferior, fear that I really don't know enough, that other people can know more than I do. So now I'm afraid, and the fear and the arrogance and the ignorance can lead to a lifestyle of bigotry, where I'm afraid of these other people because I'm ignorant of who they are, what they do, etc. Or it doesn't have to be people, it can be ideas or concepts. And so I take a real strong stand in what I believe, right or wrong, true or false, and I ridicule, harass, and try to get rid of the others. So that's what bigotry is. And in effect, if we look as far back to the founding of the United States, or even before the U.S. was founded, and we use the same example over and over again, but unfortunately it's true, that the Europeans coming out of Europe, trying to find a shortcut to India, to the West Indies, to Asia, bumped into Africa and eventually into the Americas, but bumped into Africa, were ignorant of the African cultures, were arrogant towards them, at some level were afraid of them, and developed bigoted views toward them. because they weren't Christian, they weren't Spanish or English or Dutch or Portuguese or French, um, which were the earliest arrivals to North America and South America and the Caribbean. So then it did the same thing when it got to the Americas. New culture, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, ignorant of the culture, developed arrogance toward them, were somewhat afraid of them because they were so different, and then developed bigoted views of them. Whereas they enslaved the Africans, they chose to try to take land from and force the Native Americans to assimilate into the European and then the American cultures. So nowadays we have versions of that still exist around race, exist around gender, exist around sexual orientation and identity. And I would argue, I keep going back to our pal in Florida, but a good chunk of Ron DeSantis's work in Florida as governor and his presidential platform to run for the Republican primary is based on bigotry. This is what's true, and all of these other beliefs are wrong. We're going to keep them out of our school, and you can't do this, and you can't have these books. So that's bigotry at its, that's bigotry with a capital B in mainstream America. And then all of the, the Proud Boys and I think they're called the active groups now that practice martial arts, and they're neo-Nazi groups, but they don't use swastikas, but they have the same belief systems. All of them operate from bigoted viewpoints. So I'll take a breath there. And that's what we're exploring in terms of healing the narratives of this country.
Well, definitely a great topic. And thank you for, putting the effort, the time to select it, and the thought behind the context of our discussion today. And I appreciate you defining bigotry clearer, because to your point, I always look at it as being more so a synonym of being prejudice, not so much racist, but prejudice. So I look at racist as being more a position of power, where bigotry I felt was coming from someone who felt they were superior because of their race and felt that you were inferior because of your race. And that's where I was going with. So your definition helped cleans it up a little bit. So I'm going to have to think through a little bit more of how I want to discuss my perspective within the way you defined it. Like I said, it's definitely a different direction I was going in. But
so let me jump in for a second, because I think the direction, if I'm not mistaken, the direction that you were going to go in, I think that it is part of, like, bigotry is like a larger concept than just one issue. It always involves some kind of prejudice, for sure,
right.
Because I'm prejudiced against other views, regardless of what the content is, whether it's race or gender, or even political parties can be bigoted against other political parties. So I think, I have a sense of where you were going to go. I think it's probably still relevant and a sweet spot in the larger, like to say it in a kind of goofy way, bigotry is a big tent. Like it allows anybody who has a biased view about anything under the tent of bigotry. So I just wanted to say that, if that's helpful, or if I just made it worse.
No, that's helpful.
Yeah.
That's helpful, because I was going to look at it from the perspective of when you allow yourself to become or accept the victim mentality, then you operate within that bigoted perspective of you, that viewpoint of you. And then you see the world as against you, and then your options as far as what you can achieve in the world limited. So then you feel that you have to be and go out here and do these type of things that are, it's kind of like, when you only been conditioned to eat scraps, then someone offers you a full course meal, and even though we all know logically and nutritionally is much better for you, you don't know that you use the scraps, and so you discard that. It's not being valuable, or you're not being worthy of it, whether it's a conscious choice or unconscious choice. And that's what I see, because if someone can steal a car that fast, imagine what they can do if they put their mind toward more creative endeavors. Stealing a car is not a simple thing, and then on top of that, it's an extremely dangerous thing. But these young kids is doing this, not grown men. So it's young kids who are believing that the world is against them and that they're believing a bigoted view perspective, point of view, and they're operating within that, which is a very dangerous mix because their parents probably accept it and believe it and operate from within that. And so then they're going to operate within it and they're going to do more of a, well, I'm going to take what I can from the world as opposed to I'm going to create value and I want to bring meaning to the world. I was listening to this podcast interview. It was interesting. It was Piers Morgan interviewing rapper Ice Cube. Mm-hmm. And Ice Cube is he says he's going to go on a world tour to promote his Big Three basketball tournament that he has going on this summer. And what's interesting to me is that Piers Morgan asked him, he said, so, and I knew that was going to be one of the questions that, Piers Morgan likes to kind of stir the pot, with some of his questions. He asked him, so do you think racism has changed at all, since you were just start off over the last 30 or 40 years? Have you think it's changed at all? That's a question I had to ask a group of blacks that I was visiting my niece's home welcoming party or new home ownership party, or I forgot what you call those. But anyway, I asked that question before, and I was surprised that, again, that successful blacks who have made it and have a career, they have a pretty established life, they pretty much achieved what they pretty much wanted in life for the most part. Mm-hmm. Not to say that they haven't had obstacles, not to say that they haven't had barriers, but they've resisted and persevered through those. And looking at someone as successful as Ice Cube, where he's at right now, he said, no, I don't think it's changed much. As a matter of fact, it's gotten worse. And he used a financial perspective to say financially, a lot of blacks are still locked out. And he was saying that it's still difficult to get access to capital. And see, for me, when I asked that question, I knew in my mind that I felt that it had changed. It's changed quite a bit, from what it used to be and what we as blacks in America could do and how society accepted us. Has it gone completely? No, it's not. But look at Ice Cube, who has to be worth at least $300 million easily, and you got your own league that you have that you're running, and you don't operate as though it's still the same. But you say that it's still the same. So it's like, I think people don't really consider the damage that does when you say that on both sides. Because what you're saying is, okay, for white Americans who feel that they've accepted and they don't harbor any maybe racist ideology toward blacks, maybe not know blacks personally, may have some prejudice ideas. I think all of us are prejudiced of folks that we don't know, especially because society paints those pictures of other people. If you're not in common or in contact and have conversations, then you're going to have certain prejudice. But so I think it's dangerous for that perspective, because it shows that, okay, well, to white folks, from my perspective at least, no matter what we do, you don't appreciate it. I think that, a lot of things have changed. You all probably will say, white people will say, I think a lot of things have changed. And then from a black perspective, then you're not looking at the opportunities you have available to you. You're not looking at, well, because if you believe it hasn't changed, then you still have that belief that the mental change is still there. The barriers are still preventing you to have access to certain things. Like I don't really believe it's many black people who have maybe an 800 credit score, make $250,000 a year, and have good careers that can't go out and buy a house. Now, I'm sure that maybe there may be some places where they will deny you a particular house in a certain neighborhood. That's a whole different thing. But where I'm going is the change has been over 30, 40 years that no one black could buy a house. That was a norm, that you couldn't buy a house, regardless of your credit score, regardless of your profession, regardless of your financial position. You couldn't buy a house. You were barred from it. So that's changed. So I'm just really saying all that to really put another context that what bothers me is when people of my race accept the perspective of the bigot, that they operate within that perspective, and how that limits your creativity, that limits your ability to just be as valuable and productive as you can be in the world.
Yeah, I mean, there are at least two things that you said I want to respond to. I'll start with the most recent one, with regard to the interview with Pierce Morgan and Ice Cube, and around his take that it hasn't changed. The most in my reading and listening and direct experience of the world, I mean the perspective on has racism changed at all. Ibram Kendi's, I think he first wrote it in Stamped from the Beginning, but he said he didn't see movement against racism and then a backlash against that. What he said was, it's a beautiful statement. I'm going to try to paraphrase it, but he says what he sees in all of his research historically is a dual, DUAL, and dueling, DUELING, progress of both anti-racism, people fighting against racism, and racism. So these two movements, a racist movement and an anti-racist movement, have been, battling each other, pretty much since before the country was founded, and they do it more, visibly now in media and all that. And both are true. Both, because there's more and more, nowadays in Europe and even in the US, there's more and more white supremacist groups, far right groups, who would be really happy if they lived in an all white Christian place. That said, I mean, one of the easiest ways to look at some of the progress that's been made is look at the United States presidency from 2008 to 2016, but also to look at photographs of the United States House of Representatives, from today, and go back every 10 years for a century. And you can see that that's just two markers. So I agree that it leads to the second piece, this victim, kind of mentality. And I agree with you on this too, because my favorite example of that, of the victim mentality, currently, and both sides play it. If you're on the right, you're the victim of the elite, progressive, woke nation. And if you're on the left, you're the victim of the white, traditional, patriarchal, racist, sexist, foundation of the country. I'm being a little bit, hyperbolic in that. But nowadays on college campuses, and college campuses aren't the only place to see this, but they're probably a primary place, is many students, not all, some faculty and administrations, not all, play that victim card, where we're, and they're mixed race, they're white, they're black, they're brown, they're heterosexual, they're homosexual, they're transsexual, they're bisexual, but they play the role that we, are being victimized by the system at large, and we need to be kept safe, and it's all against us. There are many examples of that, where some really talented college professors, university professors, who were among the best allies for these students, the students found something to criticize, and the professors got fired or resigned because of all the pressure put on them. So that victimization thing, for me, is another form of, it's kind of like a reverse bigotry. Oh, all of those other views are against me and my group. So I'm going to try to cancel them. They're not as woke as I am. When I say woke, in the way I just used it, I'm using it in the way that I think it has been misused by many people, kind of wielding it as a weapon. You're not as woke as I am, so I'm a victim of your lack of being woke. And that's what the far right has done, is taken that and run with it. They've painted the entire Democratic Party and anything left of center as the woke crowd, and they're not. I mean, some of them are, but woke simply means, in its early, and I like saying this out loud, woke in its earliest and healthiest manifestation And it was first used in the American community, in my knowledge of this, back, I know it goes back at least to the 1930s. It meant staying woke meant staying awake to, aware of, and concerned with where it was safe to be, especially, but not only in the South, and where it wasn't safe to be. This was still during, Jim Crow and times of lynchings. So staying woke was a survival strategy, staying aware of where I am and making sure it's okay where I am. Now we could extrapolate it back because woke simply means awake to. That's another way to say it. So the earliest example of being awake that I know of, and it's not an American, but it was Buddha, 2,500 years ago, where once he sat under the Bodhi tree and got enlightened and he was walking around being a wise person, maybe a wise guy too, I don't know. And people would say, "Are you a saint?" He would say, "No." Are you God? No. Are you a sage? No. Because what are you? I'm awake. That's what he would say. So what has happened, fast forward now, this idea of being woke, which makes perfect rational sense, as at least as a survival strategy. Fast forward into the 2020s, where we are right now, even into the 20 teens. Some folks began to use woke as a superiority self-description. I'm woke, you are not. They were typically on the left when they did that. And that's what the right jumped on. So the left began wielding their wokeness as a weapon. The right responded to that and just criticized them for it. And that's a big tool in the almost every Republican candidate's toolbox running for office is the anti-woke platform. The irony is very few of them, if any of them, ever define what they mean by the word woke. You can't find it on Ron DeSantis' website because I looked. If it's there, they buried it deeply. So there's this mutual victimization. Right? The right is being victimized by the woke left. The woke left is being victimized by the racist, sexist, homophobic right. And nobody's really listening to each other. And we're in a horrible mess because of that. But again, to come back to your point, playing that role of the victim doesn't help anybody. And as we say that, just so we can be clear to anybody who listens to this, we're not talking about somebody who has literally been the victim of a violent crime or combat, who has post-traumatic stress. We're not critiquing that. We're saying somebody who has embraced the role of victim as that's who they are in their life, as opposed to somebody who's been the victim of violence or some other horrible thing. So yeah, and the bigotry. My story is right. Yours is wrong. We're going to try to get rid of you. Nobody has a monopoly on that. It goes across the political spectrum. And most of the people who are most bigoted will never admit it because they don't see it that way. They really believe that they're right. Okay, that was kind of a long one, but
No, it was very interesting. I've had a discussion before on woke, and see, I remember coming up in my, as you said, the cultural givings in my community at the time, right around when I was a teenager, this new information, this new awareness was coming along about understanding the importance of understanding as a Black person your history and your culture, and studying African history and African culture, and that really helped me become more focused and more proud for who I am. And that was kind of anti the whole victim mentality, because if you see yourself in a positive light, then you can't be a victim. I don't think those two thoughts can operate in the same headspace. And the word we use, and it's funny how things get co-opted that we feel from our community, we use the term conscious. We say we were conscious. That was the term we would say with someone who was well versed, knowledgeable with their history and their culture, and had a pride about who they were as an individual. It wasn't about hating any particular group of people at all. It was about loving who you were And that was a major paradigm shift from what I experienced coming up, because most of the things I seen on TV, starting with the Roots and what I was learning in school, was always designed to create hate within of ourselves. You're nothing. You're a slave. Your people didn't achieve anything. Your people don't have anything. Your people didn't create anything. That was the narrative I had to battle with coming up as a youth. So when I began to read our history and our culture and realized, no, we did achieve some great things. I'm descendants from great African kings and queens, and we contributed quite a bit to this country and to the world. That opened up my mind to put me on the path to really be focused on loving education and putting me out there. So conscious was a term. And then it's funny how I got later on in life and in the business world, I started using the term conscious to create, uh, uh, conscious capitalism, being aware and having a higher purpose behind your business. So that got co-opted in that space. And then woke, as you said, woke was used as a synonym of conscious. You're sleep. In other words, if you're not conscious, meaning wake. You wake up, you're conscious. You're unconscious, meaning that you're asleep and that you're not awoke. And to your point, it was again about being aware of what's going on in the world around you and aware of how you have to navigate that. But now it's co-opted, as you said, and it's become a buzzword for the rights to unite around the white ring, to unite around that. And what I've learned is, if you look at just again history, that the right has always simplified their messaging. I think that's why they've been very successful. They simplified their messaging to get people to rally around it.
Yeah.
Whether it was build a wall and message gonna pay for it, or make America great again, that was never really defined what that meant, make America great again. But it was enough of a rallying cry that people can play with within their imagination. And it's the same thing with woke. It's now, instead of being for something what Donald Trump was advocating for, let's make America great again, we're for that. Now it's woke, we're against that. So now it's shifted, the energy has shifted to be against something. But again, it's a very simplified message that people can unite around. And that's why I think that folks on the left get it wrong, even though you're right, both sides play the victim role. They just get it wrong because they don't simplify their message. Yeah. And there's a unifying cry around it, other than we want to be anti what the right is saying. It's only unifying. But then that still is not defined, because to your point, I think it's dangerous for the right to define woke, because they've defined it, then they have to debate you on those issues within that. But they just leave it abstract. Okay, well, I don't want to define it. My base doesn't want to be defined, because it gets everybody to feel the victim. You're a victim because the woke crowd is coming against you. And then the other side is saying, well, the other crowd is holding you back. And I appreciate you saying that we're not talking about people who are victims of whether it was war, POWs, or ex-soldiers who've gone through certain trauma, or folks who are survivors of, or any survivor who truly was a victim of some kind of brutal, violent attack. But what's interesting is that I even heard just yesterday, I was watching a podcast, and a gentleman talked about who was a Navy SEAL, and he had got shot over in Afghanistan. And you can see, look at his face. He said he got shot in the face. His arm got almost blew off, and his arm was smaller than his other arm. His right arm was smaller than his left arm. And he was saying how, even from his perspective, it was so important not to see himself as a victim. And I'm saying that only in the context that whatever, and I'm not judging anybody. So when I talk about victim, I'm saying it from a judging context. It's just that there is, again, it's engineering me, and I look at things as being logical, on 0 or 1, on or off, value or no value, that there is absolutely no value in adopting a victim mentality regardless, because it holds you back, it limits you. Now, each person has a right to deal with that, how they want to deal with their trauma. But in healing, as you talk about in your book, if you want to heal, meaning that, I look at it as begin to now move past it, accept it, begin to start to think differently about the situation. That's how I summarize the healing part. You begin to start to process it differently
Yeah.
than you were previously. Then you want to move away from a victim mentality and more towards, okay, what can I do with where I am right now? What power do I have within myself? Because when you put victim or you play the victim card from a ideological standpoint, then what you're saying is you don't have the power. The power is external to you, and that you have to rely on someone else to come and save you or help you. Whereas once you say, I'm not a victim, regardless of the circumstances, then what you're doing is you're giving yourself the power. Now, not to say you don't need help, as you can change everything by yourself.
Right.
But the first step is to say, no one wants to help someone who doesn't want to be helped. But if you actually say, here's what I'm doing, I'm on the right path, I'm beginning to make a difference, I want to be a change, then people will feel that energy. This has been my experience. People will feel that energy and they will want to help you because people want to serve and help someone who they feel is going to be something that's going to bring value into the world.
Yeah.
I truly believe that. And I believe that if I saw myself as a victim of whatever the case may be, then I won't be able to have both thoughts in my head simultaneously. I believe the world is either an evil place that hates me, that holds me back, that wants to see my demise, that wants to never see me progress because of the color of my skin, or I see the world as I'm a human being that has a journey to go through, and I'm going to focus on love and learning and enjoy this journey as much as I can. And that's my perspective. I believe the world is going to be a much better place to live in, regardless of whatever anyone else's intentions may be for me in the world.
Yeah, I love the clarity with which you describe that. And so, two things, going back to the woke thing for a second, I really want to zero in on what you just said about the victimhood, though. Adopting the victim mentality as opposed to somebody who was, in fact, literally the victim of violence. And might need help, but makes the choice not to live as a victim afterwards. But going back to the woke business, where the right doesn't define it. So when I get into conversation with anybody, and they use that word, once they're done making their point, the first thing I do, and I kind of get like a pit bull with this. I'm not mean. I don't get like in their face, but I just say, so when you say the word woke, what do you mean by that? And if they won't answer it, I'll keep asking. Okay, because we don't get to have a conversation if you're going to use that word. And there's other words like that I'll do that with. Because if we don't know what we're really talking about, we can't have a conversation.
Right.
So any politician who's being interviewed uses that word, the journalist, if in fact it is a journalist they're talking to, sometimes it's just a performance news celebrity who doesn't really have any journalistic chops. Define the word. What do you mean by woke? What is it that you're against? So that for me seems like an easy thing to do. And again, not to ridicule the person that's using the word, just to get clear. And if they don't know what it means and they admit that, then I'll say, well, here's the history of it to the extent that I've studied it and I understand it. And I'll share that with them. So I think that that's just an important move to make. We're allowed to ask for clarity when somebody is blowing smoke into one of our orifices, whether it's up our noses, in our ears, or some other part of the body. The second piece, which, about being the victim, I mean, a great example of that, and I hate to even speak about it, but they're, very public. So I know, one of the parents of one of the, first graders who died at the Sandy Hook shooting in 2012 in Newtown, Connecticut, was a student in the high school when I was teaching at Sacred Heart in Yonkers. And I don't know him real well, but we spoke once after the shooting, some years after the shooting. What he and his wife and his kids now, his surviving kids, their son had two older siblings and several other families. They have this organization called Sandy Hook Promise. And they have two branches. One is a political lobbying thing in DC, but the other is an educational institution. And they've provided programs across the country, maybe in Europe too, I'm not sure, but they've educated millions of students and teachers. I forget the number now, but it's in the millions on what to look for when somebody is, feel alone or is outcast. They've done all this research. So they've taken their loss. I mean, 20 first graders killed with assault weapon rounds. And 6 educators as well who were killed. So they've taken a real victimization, a literal victim of a crime, survivors of a mass shooting in a school, and turned it and empowered themselves and have become advocates for trying to limit how many more times that's going to happen in this country. So that's, I think, a good example of not playing the victim role and not pointing fingers at the gun manufacturers and everybody else. I mean, they do lobby Congress to try to pass more sensible gun legislation, especially with regard to assault weapons. But their primary work has been around education. So that's, I think, a great example of something that for me is unfathomable to be the parent, and whether it's Sandy Hook or Parkland or Columbine, or there's so many now, I can't even, Uvalde. Most of those folks, or many of them, have taken that horror and turned it into some kind of positive movement to make the world a better, safer place, which is a big job nowadays. So I think that's those folks, and I'm giving kind of monolithic here, as though they're all the same, and they're not. But many of the folks who have lost people in mass shootings have decided not to play the victim role and have really stepped into trying to, really to heal other people. So I just thought they were a good example. And there's many more out there besides just mass shooting survivors.
Yeah, and let me bring a little bit more clarity to that as well, because I think that it's important how we define it. Because you're right, folks can take what we're saying out of context and attack us for talking about folks who actually suffered trauma. And so the way I really want to say is not necessarily playing the victim role, and in all cases accepting the victim mentality.
Yeah.
Because, and I use this analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly.
Yeah.
Like if you're the caterpillar and you accept the victim mentality, you can never transform into the butterfly. You can't do that. You have to not see yourself as a victim, as a caterpillar. I'm stuck on this ground. I can get crushed. Why can't I fly? Why can't I just move around at a speed and enjoy the world in a different place? You have to not accept that mentality. And that's where we're both saying that same thing, that it's about accepting that mentality. Now, some people do play a role with it for an agenda, for a purpose, but there's danger in accepting the mentality on every level, because you can't transform and you can't grow, and you can't, as you talked about what they did with the Sandy Hook School and the different organization that was created. So they transform that. So the goal is, as we talk about the title of your book and the purpose of this show, as well as your company, is to become fully human.
Yeah.
That's a transformation we want to make. We're not born fully human. We have to go through life's journey, and we have to go through the obstacles and the challenges and the pain and the trauma and all the things that being a human being entails. But that's the journey you're on to become more fully human, because it helps you if you're reading the right information, you're growing at the right rate, you're meeting the right people, you're feeling the right energy, you're experiencing life, and you're tapped into love more than anything else. Then you're gonna have a wonderful journey along being fully human. You're gonna enjoy the painful moments, because the painful moments help you grow and they help you appreciate. Like, use an analogy again, your whole hand was numb, and then someone was able to come over there and take a nail and drive a nail through your hand, and you don't feel it. That's not a good thing.
Right.
You want to be able to feel the pain when they start the hammering. You want to be able to feel that pain so that you can react, and that's what pain is a way of an indicator to let you know something's going wrong. You need to pay attention. Bring your attention here. And the last thing I want to say, again, on the context of bigotry and this whole woke thing we're talking about. So I think where the conversation for folks to get away from using the term woke, and this is how we opt that word again, is to just do away with woke from the left, if that's what the right is going with, and start talking about not just down from the left, but for folks who are really looking for justice in this world. I'm for that. I'm for justice. I'm for love. I'm for service. I'm for making sure that people have equal opportunities, not necessarily equal outcomes, but everyone has the right to do what they want to do, is to focus on being more emotionally intelligent. If you're more emotionally intelligent, and that's what your goal is, then they can't be used against you, because now you're saying, well, I'm going to be more empathetic, more understanding, more tolerant. And so now that can't be used against you. But if you're going to say, well, I'm woke, and you're not woke, see, right there, you're not being emotionally intelligent in that behavior characteristic. So that, I just want to put that out there. The goal is to be more emotionally intelligent, not woke. And let that be how you define yourself as a person who is more worldly, open-minded, tolerant.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that. And again, I appreciate your clarifying the difference between, because I said playing the victim role, and you moved that towards what you're really saying is not adopting a victim mentality. And those are, not the same thing. So I appreciate that clarity as well. So bringing this full circle to what we're talking about is bigotry, and that's the view. And this is oversimplified, but it's accurate. The view that my view is the right one, and any other view needs to be, typically when I'm a bigot, I ridicule, I demean, I harass, and I try to delete, cancel other views that aren't the same as mine. And there's no political that happens across the political spectrum. Nobody, as I said before, has a monopoly on that, and that's part of the problem. Something you and I have touched on before is it used to be, we're old. I'm old enough to say this. When there'd be disagreement on an issue, and even in politics, and they would disagree, they'd be on the floor of the House, the floor of the Senate, in Washington, D.C., and they would disagree, and they would debate things, they would vote. Then they'd go out and have dinner together. Rarely happens anymore. Nowadays, when somebody disagrees, and this happens all the time in the media, on rare occasions in the United States Congress, when someone disagrees, they accuse their opponent of being un-American. So I'm American. I mean, it's not funny, but it is, in one level, it's just goofy. It's immature. It's pre-adolescent, with all due respect to middle schoolers and grade schoolers. But if you disagree with me, you're not an American, even though you were elected to, the House of Representatives. That's idiocy. And that's common nowadays. And that's a form of bigotry. Your view is not American. I'm against you because you're not an American anymore. Oh, so in the land of the free and the home of the brave, where there's a First Amendment about freedom of speech and freedom of the press and freedom to assemble, and the government shall make no religion, blah, 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 I can't have a different opinion. So it's a level of, I mean, I'm going to use the word again. As I listen to some of it, it's a level of idiocy. And you've made this point very well in the past, that some people in politics deliberately play that game because they know it works with their constituents, where they'll call somebody, their opponent, un-American, and Trump implies that because red hat, white words, make America great. He plays that card, as others do as well. So it's a deliberate move, but it's not a particularly developmentally adult move. It's not a fully human move at all. So,
yeah, and as we get ready to wrap things up, I just want to add this last point. I wish that people would think about holding their elected officials accountable to what they're going to do for you, not what they're against. What are you for?
Yeah.
Right? That's the conversation I want to have. Because that's when you really see what their platform is really about. Again, if they begin to talk about what they're for is eliminating all the things they're against, then you have your answer. They don't have really a platform. They're not going to bring anything positive to the space, regardless if it's left or right. I just want to throw that part in. But now we reached a part of the show where kind of give us some examples of what we can do to be less bigoted in our viewpoints as we move forth in the world.
Yeah. So I mean, there are any number of ways. I mean, the first one is simply in quotation marks, self-reflection. Just in the absence, well, actually, in the absence of being woke. So I'll play with it a little bit. If you're not aware, if you're not conscious of what's really happening out there, and you can't reflect on your own views, it's hard to recognize your own bigotry, and it's impossible to correct it, to do away with it. Having said that, there's a variety of questions. If I take a strong stand on some perspective, on an issue, or just on an argument about something, questions I want to ask myself: Is it true? So is what I believe true? And if I say yes, how do I know it's true? Right? And then if I have some reasons for that, I want to go in and explore each of those reasons. It might be, well, because I saw it on Facebook, or they said it on NBC Nightly News, or I read it on Breitbart. So to really interrogate my own views and be willing to take some stranger's word for it because it appeared online somewhere. There's a lot more, but that's the first step. Is what I'm holding on to true? In the deep meaning of that word, that I can prove that it's just factual, that an ideal observer, somebody who had no skin in the game, could listen to what I say and agree with it. It's somebody without any biases. That's the ideal observer, in philosophy. So is it true? It's just to really become self-reflective and interrogate my own perspectives. Not because I'm always going to be wrong, but to make sure that I'm not bigoted. So that's the one thing I would put out there.
Well, excellent. I think that's great advice. And again, the goal is for us to, you and I, through our discussion in this podcast, is not to just talk about all the problems that are wrong in the world, but talk about how do we heal and put ourselves, all of us, on the path to become more fully human. And that's a journey. Again, it's not something that you're ever going to reach probably in your lifetime, but the goal is to constantly stay on the path while you physically in your physical human form, and live life to its fullest and love. And that to me is a much better life than life filled of hate, of doubt, of jealousy, and of all the other 9 shadow elements you talk about.
Yeah.
And now we shift into give an example of who we believe is someone who, whether they're past or present, who has or currently exhibiting the fully human behavior characteristics. I'll go first. And it's a person who I've admired for some period of time. And I'm really now more than ever before looking at individuals with this question in mind. Who would I love to have dinner with? I would love to be able to sit down and actually have a conversation and just really explore their mind, and someone who I really admire. And not because of some kind of just achievement financially or career-wise, but who they are as an individual, what characteristics they've shown. And so with that being said, and again, these people are not perfect. So some people may have issues with this person in other areas. And I don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. But my person I have in mind is Sylvester Stallone this time, today. And I choose him mainly because I've always loved the movie Rocky. It's one of the movies that I love. And I love the Rocky series for the most part. But exception of Rocky Five, like most people. But just his career and who he is as a person, and looking at the people's lives he's impacted, and his commitment to excellence, and also when he created the Creed franchise, and created that franchise, and his goal was to keep it authentic. Up in Philadelphia, he let the black culture of it be the dominant, and he showed that. He's shown a lot of anti-racist attitudes in how he's moved his entire life, and I just think that, to me, he's a person that, if we're going to look to admire, celebrities, he is a celebrity that I believe deserves that admiration for the lives he's helped, the people he's served, and his commitment to excellence, and just really being an overall great person. And never have I felt that he's had that arrogance of getting out there and saying things from a very limited perspective, like certain entertainers who I've admired on the screen and admired their work as a professional. When they got a chance to run for office, and you realize, okay, I don't like this person. Such as Clint Eastwood, didn't care for him much when I heard his perspective. And Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's taking me some time to get back around to liking Arnold Schwarzenegger now. But prior to that, to me, Sylvester Stallone has always been that person who I would love to have dinner with, and who I admire, and I believe deserves more recognition than he gives, as far as his level of excellence and commitment to the craft he brings in as a human being.
Yeah, thanks. So I want to say, yo, Adrian. So I think that the writing, the way he developed the Rocky character, because he wrote the scripts through, all, including through the first two Creed movies, he really developed the character. I mean, so the writing is really good. If you don't like boxing movies or whatever, great. But it's a character that really began in a certain place, hit the heights, go down to the bottom again, but kept his humanity in many ways. So I think the writing is, so I love that choice. So I'm going to mention two people that are husband and wife. So Jess and Rich Fierro, Fierro. So she's the owner. They work together at the Atrevida brewery in Colorado Springs, Colorado. And they were involved, or they were at, I forget the name of the club now, but it was there was a drag show at some club in Colorado Springs. This is almost a year ago now. I forget what the date was, where some guy came in and opened fire. It was one of the mass shootings. And Rich Fierro he's a retired career Army guy, big guy. And he took down the shooter without a weapon. He just jumped him and prevented, more shooting, more deaths. And so the word got out the following day. So I went on and I learned about him. And they sell merchandise at the brewery, like shirts and caps. So just to try to help them, because of what had just happened there. And their daughter's boyfriend was killed in the shooting. They were all there together just to watch the show. And again, they're not, they're heterosexuals, and not that matters, but they were just there because they knew people in the town. They knew some of the drag performers, and they were just there to have a good time, have some beers and burgers, whatever. So their lives were changed by this. The kid that they knew, their daughter's boyfriend died. So I went and I bought some merchandise. I used it as Christmas gifts because it was, coming up on Christmas. Maybe it happened in September, I forget. And so because a lot of people had the same idea, they were overwhelmed with orders in the days, weeks, and months after the shooting, and when it became known what happened and how he had stopped the shooter. They couldn't keep up with it. They were a small operation. And since then, they have sent out emails on a regular basis. The most recent one came today saying, we're processing this, we're getting a new manufacturer, keeping people who tried to help them informed, saying, we're apologizing it's taken so long, and saying we're close now, you're probably going to have your merchandise within a month now, something like that, because they found a new manufacturer. But in the middle of that, they were getting harassed because people said, where's my hat? Where's my sweatshirt? You guys are frauds. And they were getting all kinds of online harassment, which just shows the idiocy again of so. But they stayed kind of level headed through the trauma of being in that room in that club when the shooting took place. His life was changed. He was interviewed by every major news station, and then all of these orders from well-meaning people like me trying to help them by buying something from them, and then the idiocy of the people who just harassed them because they didn't get their hat in time. And they've just had this steady, positive, appreciative, grateful attitude in the ensuing months. So anyway, I don't know them. I know them, from the news and from emails that I was included in because I ordered some stuff. But they just seem to have this kind of grounded, fully human connection in the space of running their business, which is a brewery, being in the place where they were traumatized by an event, and then just getting back to a more close to normal way of being. So that's Jess and Rich Fierro.
Excellent, excellent. So did you ever receive your hat or?
No, they just, in fact, the email from today said that they're really close. They have the manufacturer that can handle the large volume, and they're beginning to do the manufacturing run now. And the orders are going to start coming out in the next, 2 to 3 weeks. So you should have it within a month or so, they said. So, and there's no reason not to trust them. They chose to stay in touch. I've probably received 5 emails since all this stuff took place. So.
And see, thank you for sharing it. And just quickly, I just want to say this. That's the difference between someone like yourself, who I believe that you were using that, purchasing a hat or a t-shirt, whatever you were buying, as a way of supporting them. So your objective wasn't to get the end goal of the hat or the t-shirt.
Right.
It's to say, thank you for your heroic effort and let me support you. And you've achieved that goal. Whereas someone else is looking at it from a context of the folks who are complaining, the trolls, they're looking at it as a context of they just want some kind of souvenir to say it's not about supporting them. They just really want the objective of the material, the merchandise they can sit here and brag or give the impression that they're supportive. So it just shows you people's intent and agendas behind their actions as well.
Yeah, and I just did a quick look, and so the shooting was in last November, late November, and the club they were at was called Club Q, which I used to remember because I've written a lot of poetry on violence in America, and I used to be able to name the venues and the towns they were in, and there's been so many now. I have to look. That's horrible to say that, but it was. I appreciate you saying that because that was the intention. Wow, let me buy something from these people. I'm sure they make something from it, and just to say thank you. So, yeah.
And to me, that's where we really advocate here on the show. I mean, it's your intention should be to be about love, to be about service, to be about helping, to be kind. And if that's your intention in everything you do, you're not going to be upset if someone takes longer than what you expect, longer than what they said they would do to deliver, as long as your intention was to be helpful in that context. And that to me is where that's one of the benefits, the pleasures, I should say, of being fully human, is that you're helping and serving without an agenda or a negative self-serving agenda. Let me say your intention, which is a give and to help and put this person in a better place. So long as that's met, then you're feeling fulfilled inside. And for folks who've never served and helped others, if you've never experienced fulfillment, you're going to realize it's 100 times better than anything you can receive by being selfish as a material gift, a monetary reward based on something that way. Fulfillment is a much better intensity and joyous expression of love than anything that any kind of material thinking they can give us. And that's what you learn on that journey. So I just want folks to really, let's focus on being more fully human now more than ever, putting ourselves in the right tribes, connecting to the right people, putting ourselves on that journey. And hopefully the show can be either the linchpin, catalyst, the start to put you on that path, or it could be your connector that you tap into on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. And thank you for listening to today's show. I ask you to listen to next week's show again at 10 a.m. where Reggie and I will have another topic, and we'll continue to discuss ways we can all become more fully human. So thank you all for your time. Thank you again, Reggie, for your
You're
time as
welcome.
well.
Yeah, thank you, King.